Okay, so just to clarify something before the video actually starts, Little Woman is technically broken up into two books. It's Little Women, which is them as children, and then it's Good Wives. But the version I have, at least, or most versions of Little Women, will just have them compiled together. I suspect that today's era of well, I'm not. You guys know what I mean. Probably doesn't like the idea of a book called Good Wives, so just having them being called Little Women all together is probably why it was bundled together that way. Since again, there's not even a section where it says like, all right, this is where Little Woman ends and Good Wives begins. The other two books afterwards seem to focus on Joe. I'll probably read that on my own at some point. I'm just clarifying. The next one will be Little Men and then Joe's Boys. So in case for whatever reason you actually find the book might sound interesting to you or you just want to give it a try, it's technically 4 books in the series, but 2 of the books are usually bundled together. So yeah, now I'm just going to do it for my future self. Now, as some of you may or may not know if you follow my live streams, and I think I mentioned a little bit on the videos as well, I actually have college going on right now. This video is going to be strictly for college purposes. It's going to be an overview of the book Little Woman, not specifically for a college project or anything, but just to tell my future self as like a 10-minute review of the book beforehand or less. It's just going to be a quick overview of the story, characters and stuff of that nature. Since I just finished reading the book, I'm going to get what I consider to be the most important points out of the way. The quiz is going to be on 3 different books, so there will be 2 more videos like this, but realistically speaking, it shouldn't be too in-depth. I'll just have a picture of the cover for the video. And yeah, so with that said, I guess I'm going to be talking about Little Woman now by Louise May Alcott. Alcott, I think. It's a mispronunciation. So the basic overview of the story, it's your standard coming-of-age story from a very long time ago. Actually, I think I need to know when it's published for the actual quiz. Let me, hang on. Yeah, so it's a very old book back in 1868, and that makes perfect sense, actually. It's actually 2 books in one, because the first half of the book is the original story of them as little girls, and then the other half of the book is them growing up into womanhood and stuff. And the time it came out in 1868 perfectly encapsulates the themes of the book and basically when it comes out in. You have your 4 main characters being Joe, Amy, Beth, and Meg March. You also have the mother character, Marmee March, throughout the book. Basically, Joe starts off a tomboy and is basically the free-spirited writer one. She does stay kind of free-spirited for the most part, but she doesn't really stay independent. At the beginning of the book, her wish is to be independent, writing novels and stuff. You know, great dream for any child out there. But by the end of the book, she ends up, after losing Beth, because Beth does end up dying near the end of the book. Again, this is going to be all over the place. This is just my notes, basically. She ends up basically realizing she kind of wants a family and a husband, and she ends up marrying this old professor dude who shows up a little bit, but he's not really important until that point. Amy ends up leaving. Amy's dream originally is to just basically have the wonders of the world and to paint famous paintings. Similar to Joe, she had a dream that kind of didn't really need a family. And in today's day and age, it wouldn't really involve a family. In fact, one of the main criticisms is that most of these characters aren't independent. They're your standard 1868 type characters where their happiness is ultimately found in marriage and in a man, more or less. I think it's a little unfair to paint them that way, but I can definitely understand criticisms like that would exist as a result for this book. But basically, so Amy ends up... she ends up being... she is the youngest sister, if I remember correctly. She is the youngest one, and she ends up being the nicest one of them. At one point in the book, Joe and her talk to their rich aunt, who wants to send one of them to Europe, to fucking France and shit, so they can learn about the world. Amy, because she's a nice person, despite being younger, gets chosen over Joe. But this ultimately is a benefit to Joe because Amy isn't there for her sister as she's dying. Joe is able to take care of her sister and spend as much time with her sister as she can. So even though Joe doesn't get her original dream decision, it does end up working out better for Joe since she's able to spend the last few months of Beth's life with her. Yeah, so Amy ends up trying to become a painter. She ends up giving up because she realizes that even though she has talent, she doesn't have genius. And in comparison to the paintings of Rome and shit and the fucking French paintings and stuff, she just gives up because in comparison to them, she'll never be as good as them. Never a good idea to have, but she herself acknowledges that she just doesn't want to be an average painter. She acknowledges she's good, but she doesn't dream of being an average painter. By the end of the story, she has one child named Beth who's already kind of sick, which kind of, implies that the child most likely will end up dying later on. I didn't bother to check and see if that does happen. I don't think that'll be relevant to the quiz, but, I might look it up later for, personal preferences. Her daughter is named Beth, so definitely not a good omen. She ends up getting married. She doesn't give up on her dream per se, but she does acknowledge that she realizes she can just have a family now and then worry about her dream later because she basically marries Rich into one of the most important side characters, Lawrence, or Laurie, as he goes throughout the book. I'll talk more about him later. So Beth doesn't really have a dream for the future at the start. Like all three sisters do, except for Beth, and that kind of paints a red flag immediately. Beth's also, I guess I should mention again, like Amy does in the marrying Laurie. Again, these are more from my notes. I'm giving a quick summary. I will give my thoughts afterwards, just so that way, in case anyone's up watching this. Amy does in the marrying Laurie, who got rejected by Joe earlier on. I don't think that's relevant for the quiz, but it might be. Joe basically rejects him because they wouldn't work well together, and she kind of sees him as a brother. He got brother zoned fucking hard. It's painful. But he does end up banging her sister, so in the end it all works out. I don't know if that's going to be plot relevant or not, but I kind of feel it is because romance is a big part of the novel. Moving on forward, going with Amy, yeah. So Amy just ends up marrying Laurie. They all basically raised him. He was a boy, but they were just kind of nice to him, and they basically gave him the manners he needed to succeed in life. He was kind of born rich too, to an extent. He's richer than them per se, but it's not too big of a deal. So Beth had no dreams to begin with. And one day, Joe decides to skip out, and this is like, the irony of all of this. Joe decides to skip out on her duties because she's lazy as a child. So Beth goes to take care of a child with yellow fever, if I remember correctly. It is a kind of fever. And she gets sick. And that's what kills her. Because after she gets sick, she fucking gets destroyed by this disease. To the point where they thought she was going to die way younger, but she manages to survive, but she never recovered from this disease. Had Joe actually done what she was supposed to do and not been a tomboy, her sister would have survived. While the book doesn't try and set that up as a message or anything, if you're looking at this objectively, especially given the time frame, it might be a criticism on women, being free at this point, because again, had Joe not been as free as she was and actually done her duties as a young lady, her sister wouldn't have been killed because she would never have been exposed to the fever. But I don't really think that's the point of the story. Just kind of a criticism I'm pointing in here now. So she gets the fever and she just dies. She's just dying over the course of the book. Thankfully, she's not really in pain until the very end of the book. But they don't really focus on it too much. She goes to the beach twice, once with her mother and once with Joe. It's with Joe where she confesses yeah, I'm gonna die. I'm not coming back from this. I think we're all aware of that situation. She's kind, for the most part, but she doesn't really do anything in the story besides just dying the entire time, which, she's nice. All these characters are fun characters for the most part, but again, they don't show their age so hard in their character. They show it more in, what their characters end up doing. Meg is the last one I think I haven't talked about. Meg just gets married. She's the oldest sister, if I remember correctly, or she's the second oldest. I'm not sure if Joe's older. I had a little confusion there. Meg randomly just goes to a party. She gets humiliated because she tries to dress up to be rich and fancy when she's not, because these are poor people for the most part, but I don't know, they don't really they keep mentioning they're poor, but they keep comparing themselves to fucking millionaires and mansions and shit basically, so it's I can't really tell if they're genuinely poor or if they're just middle class. If I'm gonna be upfront, they sound more middle class than genuinely poor. So Meg ends up fucking getting married almost immediately, and that's her entire character trait. She did always want a family, though, and she did get that family. She did seem to marry rich, as far as I'm aware. They don't really talk too much. Meg's portions throughout the book, once she gets married, are basically how to deal with being a married woman, and how sometimes the woman can be at fault, sometimes the man can be at fault, you gotta make compromises. Your standard, hey, when you're married, it's not just one-sided, you gotta be a little reasonable here. Beyond that, it's that's basically it. Meg doesn't really do anything else important. Joe's the only one who does shit. Again, Joe being the tomboy. She does end up getting married to this whole Professor Nerdy end, but throughout the book, it's her decisions that ultimately move everything forward. She's the one, again, who gets Beth killed ultimately, which, again, is sad. Her free spirit, she does end up writing to several magazines, and they do get published consistently. Throughout the book, she is getting published consistently, but she keeps talking like she's not a real author. As someone who is trying to be an author these days and knowing stories of other people, on Reddit and stuff, Joe's got nothing to fucking claim, Joe has nothing to fucking complain about. She almost gets published like almost every single fucking time she tries. She only fails the first couple of times, but once she first gets published, like the worst they ask her to do is just edit out the moral shit of her books because she tries to be a moral character, at least in her novel, or at least in like the way she writes. Beyond that, though, Joe doesn't really do. I don't really think there are many more plot points besides the fact, like again, like Amy gets sent to Europe because of Joe. Joe rejects Laurie. Joe is the one who kind of like leads Laurie on. Like I'm not gonna say leading on in the sense like that he expected to get with her, but like she kind of leads him on his path of life for the most part to like turn him into a decent human being. The mother and the father don't really do much just besides comforting the entire time. I'm trying to think if there's anything plot relevant off the top of my head that like is actually relevant. There are several chapters dedicated to them sending letters back and forth, but there's nothing really like relevant in those letters as far as I'm aware. And yeah, I can't really think of anything else I would need for the quiz at this point. I've kind of covered all the main plot beats. Joe does go to, I think, a university for a while, or at least a school of some kind, because she ends up meeting that old professor she ends up marrying later on by the end of the book. But like it's a very romance-driven coming-of-age book. A lot of the actual things that go on in the book are more based on like day-to-day life and like the mannerisms women should have. I guess since I'm posting this as a video anyway, since I got 10 minutes in for the summary, which hopefully that'll be enough for me to pass my fucking quiz. But if not, hopefully the questions will help me out a little bit. It definitely shows its age. It is 1868, and that just immediately kind of shows why the women act the way they do. If you definitely are looking for like what women back then would have sounded like, or like fucking like their actions, their reasoning behind it, or I would say reasoning, but it's more like a woman's perspective. It was written, as far as I'm aware, by a woman. So yeah, no, it's a pretty good like novel across the board. Boring as fucking hell at the beginning. And I'm gonna be honest here, like there is so much description in this fucking book that doesn't need to fucking be there. The characters are good enough on its own. Like if you just read the dialogue, you'll get everything you need. Some descriptions here and there are fine, but definitely it's ironic that throughout the book, Joe gets called out to edit her novel and remove a bunch of stuff when this novel could have probably used that level of editing as well. It is 759 pages. Doesn't need to be. This could easily be trimmed down to like maybe 500 pages. On my Amazon, it's only 469. I could have easily trimmed that down to like at least 350. Like there's not. It suffers from the same problem Lord of the Rings does, except not as boring as Lord of the Rings. If you've ever read Lord of the Rings, the descriptions of Lord of the Rings are massive and they don't really need to be there. It adds charm and it does show the author's style. Really doesn't need to be there as a reader. Beyond that, though, the characters are fine, but again, they are dated. In today's day and age, like I mentioned earlier, there would definitely be criticisms that every girl finds their happiness by being married, more or less. But I wouldn't really see it that way. It's more like they've lived life, they've seen what, they've gone through shit, and they kind of just want to, they do kind of just want a partner and settle down. They want the life their mother had for the most part. They don't give up their dreams per se, but Amy kind of makes it clear that she's probably not going to continue her fucking painting. She says she will. Most likely it probably won't happen until way later. Joe's still writing. Joe never gives up her dream. She just gets fucking married at some point. They do open up a school of some kind, or at least they say they're going to open up a school. But the way it's written near the end, I was a little confused as to whether or not they actually opened up a school, or if they just had fucking 10 kids. So it's a little unclear there, but I think they did open up a school, but that was the plan. I think they get the fucking school from the aunt. I mentioned the aunt very briefly. I don't think the aunt really plays an important role in the book outside of being the fucking the author's way of sending the sisters away from each other, because that's ultimately what she does consistently, except for Joe, who leaves Beth for a little bit to go practice writing at the university or whatever that I mentioned earlier. Good book for the most part, but its age more shows in what happens to the girls, because again, a book like this would be criticized nowadays, despite the fact that it's written rather well for the most part. And yeah, no, that's just I'm just posting this on YouTube so that way I can come back to this later. So I am posting it as a quick little book summary and review. If I had to give it a fucking out of 10, I definitely think a 4 out of 10 works. Definitely, you could skip some parts and get the full effect of the book. Characters are great all across the board. They feel lifelike, at least for this era. It is a refreshing blast of fresh air reading these older novels for my class, because it's just nice seeing more formal dialogue and such. But yeah, with that said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you guys for your time as always. Have a nice day, and I'll see you guys on the next streamer video. It just occurred to me near the end. I should probably mention that the father was at war for like half of the book, for like the actually almost half of the book. Actually, I don't think he shows up till like the end, near the end of the first book. He's at war. He gets sick at one point. The mom leaves him for a little bit to go take care of him. Again, kind of ironic, that like he recovers, but the daughter doesn't, at least in my opinion. Yeah. Beyond that, I don't really think there's anything else. I think Lori goes to war at one point too, but I don't really recall that happening. I don't think that occurs, but just in case I'm leaving this here, in case it does occur. I just got done reading the book over like 3 days, listening to fucking Persona 4 in the background the entire time. So that should be more or less about everything. Again, thank you guys for your time as always. Have a nice day. This is more impromptu for like fucking, for my class, so I'm not really gonna talk too much on characters and stuff. I'm just leaving it in so that way like this can just give me a quick refresher for my brain. So yeah, thank you guys for your time as always, and have a nice day.